Why certainty collapsed into probability. For a long time, certainty felt like the natural state of knowledge, a solid foundation where facts stood still, answers felt permanent, and truth appeared immune to revision, as if the world itself had agreed to behave predictably if humans reasoned carefully enough. People trusted conclusions that sounded confident, systems that promised clarity, and explanations that left no room for doubt, because certainty felt like control in an otherwise unpredictable reality. To understand why certain no longer holds the power it once did, we have to return to a moment when confidence began failing under pressure. Early science and mathematics aimed for definitive answers. A statement was either true or false. A theory either worked or it didn't. Uncertainty was treated as error, something to eliminate rather than accept. This approach worked beautifully in simple systems, falling objects, basic mechanics, clean experiments with repeatable outcomes. Certainty flourished where variables were few and conditions tightly controlled. The success was intoxicating, but as questions grew more complex, cracks began to appear. Measurements disagreed slightly. Experiments produced variations. Results depended on conditions in subtle ways. Truth no longer appeared as a single point. It spread into ranges. At first, these discrepancies were ignored. They were blamed on noise, bad instruments, or human error. The assumption remained that perfect certainty existed somewhere beneath the mess, waiting to be uncovered with better tools. Confidence held. Then reality pushed back. Biology resisted clean prediction. Economics behaved unpredictably. Weather refused long-term certainty. Human behavior shattered assumptions entirely. The world was not broken. The model of certainty was. Probability entered quietly, not as a replacement for truth, but as a survival mechanism. Instead of asking what is absolutely true, thinkers began asking what is likely given what we know. Confidence stopped being binary. It became graded. This shift was deeply uncomfortable. Certainty had offered reassurance. Probability offered honesty. One promised control. The other admitted limits. And yet, once probability took hold, something irreversible happened. Knowledge became flexible. Beliefs could update. Being wrong stopped being fatal. Understanding could grow without collapse. Certainty did not disappear because it was weak. It collapsed because the world was stronger, richer, and more complex than certainty could contain. And in that collapse, probability did not diminish truth. It reshaped how humans learned to live with it. As probability replaced certainty, it fundamentally changed how knowledge was evaluated, because answers were no longer judged by how confident they sounded, but by how well they survived uncertainty, variation, and incomplete information. Truth stopped being something you arrived at once and defended forever, and became something you approached gradually, updating as new evidence arrived and old assumptions weakened. This transformation was subtle but profound. Instead of asking whether a claim was correct, thinkers began asking how confident they should be in it. Instead of demanding final answers, they accepted ranges, margins, and likelihoods. Error bars replaced declarations. Confidence intervals replaced absolutes. Honesty replaced bravado. Science adapted first. Experiments were no longer expected to agree perfectly. Variation became data. Replication mattered more than individual results. A single measurement lost authority. Patterns across many measurements gained it. Medicine followed reluctantly. Diagnoses became probabilities rather than labels. Treatments were weighed by risk and benefit, not certainty. Doctors stopped promising outcomes and started managing likelihoods. Patients were forced into uncomfortable conversations with uncertainty. This shift unsettled society. People wanted guarantees. Probability offered none. A 90% chance still meant failure was possible. A low risk was not zero risk. Comfort disappeared where certainty once lived. Yet probability brought clarity where certainty lied. It revealed overconfidence. It exposed hidden assumptions. It prevented single stories from masquerading as truth. Decisions became defensible rather than absolute. The hardest adjustment was psychological. Humans prefer answers that feel complete. Probability feels unfinished. It demands patience. It requires humility. It asks people to live with doubt without surrendering to it. But once adopted, probability proved resilient. Beliefs could change without shattering identity. Mistakes became part of learning. Progress no longer depended on being right the first time. Certainty collapsed not because it was wrong, but because it was fragile. Probability endured because it could bend without breaking, and that flexibility quietly became the new foundation of modern knowledge. This is where the conflict between certainty and probability became impossible to ignore, because once uncertainty was acknowledged rather than hidden, it exposed how deeply humans had relied on confidence as a substitute for understanding. Certainty had not only guided knowledge, it had shaped identity, authority, and trust, and probability quietly dismantled all three by refusing to promise what reality could not guarantee. Institutions built on certainty struggled first. Policies demanded clear answers. Leaders preferred decisive statements. Experts were expected to sound sure. Probability undermined this theater. It replaced strong claims with careful language. It introduced hesitation where confidence had ruled, and hesitation was often mistaken for weakness. This created a dangerous misunderstanding. Probabilistic reasoning was seen as indecision. Uncertainty was framed as ignorance. Nuance was punished in favor of bold simplicity. Certainty, even when wrong, felt more reassuring than probability. Even when accurate, the consequences were severe. Warnings were ignored because they lacked absolutes. Risks were dismissed because they were expressed as chances. Low probability events were postponed rather than prepared for. When failure arrived, it felt sudden and shocking, even though it had been openly described in probabilistic terms. Probability also exposed inequality in understanding. Those trained to think in likelihoods navigated risk better. Those expecting certainty felt betrayed. The same information produced different reactions, not because the data changed, but because the mental framework did. Emotion resisted probability. Fear demanded yes or no. Hope demanded guarantees. Probability offered neither. It asked people to act responsibly without emotional confirmation, to prepare for outcomes they hoped would never happen, to accept that good decisions could still end badly. This resistance created tension everywhere. Climate models were doubted because they spoke in ranges. Medical advice was rejected because it could not promise safety. Economic forecasts were blamed for being wrong when they had only expressed likelihoods. Probability was punished for honesty. Yet over time, patterns became undeniable. Systems that respected uncertainty survived shocks better. Those built on certainty failed catastrophically. Flexibility outperformed confidence. Preparation outlasted optimism. The conflict revealed a hard truth. Certainty feels powerful, but it is brittle. Probability feels uncomfortable, but it is durable. One collapses under complexity. The other adapts to it. And as complexity continued to grow, the choice between them stopped being philosophical. It became practical. It determined who was surprised by reality and who had already made room for it. The climax of certainty collapsing into probability was not chaos, but maturity. Because once humans stopped demanding guarantees from a world that could not offer them, they learned how to prepare instead of pretend. Probability did not weaken knowledge. It strengthened it by forcing honesty where confidence had once masked fragility. The resolution came through practice. Fields that embraced probabilistic thinking grew more resilient. Engineering designed for failure rather than perfection. Finance planned for unlikely shocks instead of assuming stability. Science advanced by expecting revision rather than finality. This shift changed responsibility. Being right stopped being the goal. Being reasonable under uncertainty became the standard. Decisions were judged by process, not outcome. Preparation mattered more than prediction. Emotionally, this was difficult. Living without certainty feels like standing on moving ground. But probability offered something certainty never could: adaptation. It allowed belief to evolve without collapse. It allowed progress without denial. The deepest lesson was subtle. Uncertainty is not ignorance. It is information about the limits of knowledge. When acknowledged, it guides better decisions. When ignored, it guarantees surprise. Modern life now depends on this understanding. From medicine to climate to technology, probability underpins every serious decision. Certainty survives only in simplified stories. The collapse of certainty was not failure. It was liberation. It freed knowledge from rigidity. It allowed humility to replace overconfidence. It made learning continuous. Once the shift is accepted, fear softens. Control becomes preparation. Confidence becomes calibration. Truth becomes something approached, not possessed. And in a world that grows more complex by the day, that may be the only kind of certainty we can responsibly afford. Sometimes the smallest shift in perspective becomes the beginning of a new future. Why